of the Interfaith Council of the Wabash Valley, and I'm going to be serving as the officiator of this meeting. I first of all want to mention that we have a number of co-sponsors that have made this possible, not only the Interfaith Council, but the Sisters of Providence, the Deanery, the United Hebrew Congregation, Rock Church of the Wabash Valley, and the Terre Haute branch of the NAACP. So thank you all for making this happen. So 2 years ago, many of you might remember that we had a meeting at St. George's Orthodox Church where we had a number of speakers addressing this very issue to talk about what we do in case of an emergency and keeping us safe. And so the purpose of this event is to kickstart the formation of a network of local area congregations and their leaders to plan for safety and security of our places of worship. By working with local law enforcement and emergency managers, we can each formulate enduring protocols for training and assessment that will not only provide members with ease of mind, but allow our communities to work together for the advancement of our common safety and security goals. Today, our presenters will set forth the benefits and considerations for developing plans to ensure those ends. They'll describe how they approach the issues presented and the steps they take to prepare for events that might arise. In essence, how to best prepare for a variety of challenges, although unlikely and hopefully we'll never have to face, that might occur, however, and we want to be prepared to respond. My co-sponsor, the NAACP, is being represented by the President, Sylvester Edwards. Sylvester, would you like to say a word, President Edwards?
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. Good afternoon, all. Of course, I'm the president of the NAACP, Sylvester Edwards. And as you know, that the NAACP has been around for 112 years. And our goal is for the safety and the direction of human rights and civil rights. We have been here in Terre Haute for 102 years. We are a part of the community. We help out in every way that we can with the police department, fire department, and a number of other agencies. We're here to protect, and through not only the local branch, the state conference, and the national NAACP. I'm allowed to speak for all three entities. So we are got your back. And I thank you, Arthur, for allowing the NAACP to be a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, President Edwards. We appreciate it so much. Our first speaker is going to be Greg Ferency, a member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force and detective on the Terre Haute Police Department. And the topic of his presentation is terrorism and risk assessment. Greg, thanks so much for joining us. Oh, you're muted, Greg. Scott, can you unmute Greg?
How about now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, we're going to jump right into it here. I'm going to break down terrorism into two different categories. The first one is international-based terrorism, which is basically where the act is inspired by a group that's established on a foreign soil outside the United States. The second one's going to be domestic terrorism, where the individual is inspired by a group or ideals that are based here in the United States. We'll go through some examples of those. With these, we'll often dictate into our active shooter events, which we see a lot of these days. So that can also be divided into a criminal element. And does that matter when the incident is happening? Not really. That's something that would come out in the post-investigation as far as response by police departments and law enforcement and first responders. We're pretty much going to respond to these events the same because that's what we're trained to do. And then we'll work out why this happened in the post-investigation. So you have a criminal element and a terrorism element. Radicalization is probably the name of the game that we're talking about here. And pre 9/11, radicalization and radicalized groups with a religious basis or a political basis were operated in groups, and we would call that a slow burn, where an individual would become interested in the group, they would communicate, And it would be a slow burn, if you will, as far as where this person became interested and they acted upon that interest, whether it was a violent act or sabotage or what have you. Post 9/11 and with the development of the internet, we are seeing a much different paradigm, if you will. Individuals are radicalizing themselves. They're radicalizing from their living rooms. So you can kind of see where I'm getting at, where you have an individual who communicates with other individuals. They have to talk and they have to communicate. And we would, a lot of times with intelligence and law enforcement, we can interject ourselves into that and hopefully, and sometimes we're successful, stop an incident from happening. The problem what we're having with internet radicalization is they're not communicating with anybody. They're in their living room becoming radicalized, and we're having trouble interjecting ourselves into that person before they commit the act, if that makes sense. What we call this is a flash to the bang, where the flash is where they become radicalized and the bang is where they commit a violent act. And we're having trouble interjecting ourselves into this person's life through investigations, intelligence, or what have you, to stop the act from happening, because they're not out there in the communication world talking to others where we can't intercept that. People are radicalizing across the board, whether you're far right, far left, whether it's religious based, whether it's foreign group based, whether it's a domestic group based. Dylan Roof is a perfect example of that. Dylan attacked the AME church in Charleston, South Carolina. We hopefully will get to him here in a minute. But Dylan never belonged to any group. He never belonged to any organization. He radicalized on the internet by himself. He had some communication on some chat rooms and stuff like that. But as far as everything that he did it on his own. He didn't belong to the KKK or any white supremacist organization. He acted purely alone, using their ideals to justify his actions. We see religious facilities getting attacked more and more. We've got, and even some that really didn't get that much attention. August 5th in 2012 at Oak Creek, Wisconsin, we saw the Sikh temple attacked by a white supremacist by the name of Wade Page. We had 6 dead, 4 wounded. First responding police officer was wounded and still suffering the effects of those wounds. He was shot by other policemen responding to the scene and then committed suicide. We've got the Tree of Life Jewish synagogue there in Pittsburgh, October 27th, 2018. Greg Bowers shot and then arrested by police. 11 dead, 6 wounded. These guys were too radical for groups, and that's one of the things we look at in investigations is we look for people who either leave a radicalized group or are kicked out because they are too radicalized. Those are the people that we really, really focus on. I know a lot of groups get focused on, and we do pay attention to these groups, but I'm looking at the guy who either quits because they're not radical enough or is kicked out because he's too radicalized. When they do commit a shooting act, a single shooter event lasts about 12 minutes before police get there and intervene, and the event ends one way or another. These events are going to end in one of 3 ways. The person's going to surrender and be arrested. The first responders are going to shoot and kill them, or they're going to commit suicide. That's only 3 ways these things go down or end in the end. One of the things that just absolutely terrified me, and we really don't understand this in Western culture, is when these radicalized religious-based groups, especially on the international level, they tell us this, and the quote is, "We want to die more than you want to live," which should terrify us. And that's something that in American law enforcement, we have trouble understanding. Most of our tactical operations, whether it's through SRT or SWAT, that have to deal with the person, usually deals with that person because they got involved in something where they really didn't want to be there. Something went wrong, either through alcohol or drugs. They're not thinking right. A bank robber who the police respond and block him off before he can get out of the building. We're used to dealing with people who don't necessarily want to be in that position. Maybe a domestic violence that got wrong. The guy goes barricade with his family or what have you. We have to understand that these people purposely are putting themselves in these positions. And when you get into super radicalized, religious-based, foreign, international groups, believe me when I tell you, they want to die more than we want to live. And that's a mindset that we have to understand. Some of the trends that we're seeing with these guys are they're not just simply picking up dad's gun and going to a location and start shooting. We're seeing these are very, very planned operations, and they're actually training for these operations. If you remember Cho in Virginia Tech, the Virginia Tech shooter, he actually went out to the firing range and put paper plates on the ground and then walked in between them and started shooting the paper plates. And everybody at the range couldn't figure out what he was doing. Well, we figured out that he was practicing shooting students hiding underneath their desks. As far as Cho goes, he would be considered a criminal shooter, if you will, as opposed to any kind of terrorism. And again, that's stuff we figure out post-investigation. But they're training and they're planning, which is pretty scary. A lot of us have the idea that these guys are simply having breakdowns and going out and committing a shooter act. They're also preparing as far as their weapon systems. This is a low-tech attack. They don't need nuclear weapons. They don't need biological or chemical weapons. They need a gun and some bullets. Mr. Roof, actually, when he went out and purchased his gun, he just simply went out and looked for the biggest caliber gun that held the most bullets. And his gun of choice was the Glock 21 45 cal, which incidentally is exactly what we carry on Terre Haute PD. He also thought things through in the fact where he loaded 8 magazines with 11 bullets. Now, a lot of people thought that 11 bullets represented, with 8 magazines, represented 88 rounds. 88 represents HH, because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet for Heil Hitler. Dylan tells us that it was simply a tactical thing. He didn't want the gun to jam. He didn't want the magazines to be too tight. The only reason why I bring that up is these guys are thinking this through, and they're thinking of the attacks through. We're also seeing trends as far as pure foreign international terrorism acts, and this has happened in Europe and in India, where we're seeing decimation synchronized attacks, where they'll attack one building with the use of explosives, which will kick off other cells, and they just go around and start shooting as many people and decimate as much as they can until they're shot and killed. We saw that in Paris. We saw that in Mumbai, India. This is a trend. It hasn't happened yet, but I know of here in American soil, but it's in their playbook now. And so we have to recognize that. Another event that I want to talk about real briefly is Columbine. And the reason I want to talk about Columbine is because it changed the way law enforcement responds to these events. And you will see that, and they talked about it when the Columbine event happened. Law enforcement surrounded and waited for SWAT to get there. They caught some grief for it. These guys weren't cowards. They weren't poorly trained. They did exactly what we were trained to do back then. Columbine changed the narrative where when these events happen, whether it's a church, a school, a business, a mall, we're going in right away. First guy gets there is going in and we're engaging the shooters now. And so that's an important aspect of how American law enforcement responds to this stuff. As far as what groups can do, religious facilities, a lot of what we are asking you to do, you're already doing, you probably don't know it. The security aspects of your building, intel gathering, you actually do all this stuff all the time. You just don't know you're doing it. What I would recommend is if people within a congregation would train some of their people in very basic medical trauma tactics. At the Columbine event, they had a teacher that was shot. He sat up there for hours. The kids couldn't help him. They didn't know how to help him. He ended up bleeding out, but he had a very survivable injury if he would have had some very basic medical help, if you will. There's a report system. Let your people know that if they see something, they can tell you, and then you can respond and tell us. These will be looked at. You're not bothering us. This is what we do for a living. This is what we get paid for. What we teach you guys in our schools and what have you is if you have an event, we used to teach barricade in place or hunker down in place is what they used to call it. Now what we're telling you is to run, hide, fight. To run if you can, hide if you have to, and I'm going to throw barricade in there also if you can start stacking stuff up in front of wherever position you're at, if that's possible. And if it comes right down to it, we need you to fight. Again, the average active shooter event lasts about, a single shooter lasts about 12 minutes, so seconds count here. And I will tell you, if you're a person of responsibility, of authority, and there is an event, even if it's a non-criminal, a terrorism event, maybe it's a fire or a gas explosion, if you're a person who has responsibility or authority within that facility, you're only going to be able to run as fast as your slowest person, if that makes sense. If you're there in a position where you have a responsibility to make sure everybody's safe, you can only run as fast as your slowest person, whether that's the elderly or children or what have you. So kind of keep that in mind. I'm probably running out of time here, so if you have any questions or anything like that, we'll certainly address them, but hopefully we touched on this a little bit and something to build off on.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg. I really appreciate that. Very, very informative and very helpful. Our next speaker is Chief Keen, Chief of Police of the Terre Haute Police Department, and his topic will be planning for prevention and deterrence. Chief Keen?
Thank you, Arthur.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Okay,
Yep,
thanks.
you're good.
Okay. In addition to working for the police department, I have for the last several years worked at Gibraltar Children's Services. And if you're not familiar with the campus, we have 2 schools as well as a chapel. And one of my responsibilities there is to provide training to all the staff annually in active shooter. So the method that we use there and what I'm certified in is the ALICE method. And while I'm not permitted to teach that here today, I would recommend that you have at least consider having someone who is responsible for creating a security plan for each of your places of worship. That could be a member who has a background in security or policing, or it might just be someone who you feel might be well suited for it and they might be willing to become certified in ALICE or one of the other systems created for surviving an active shooter. Since I only have a few minutes, I thought what would be best is that I highlight a couple of concepts that you can use to build on your own safety plan that might actually enhance your ability to deter or delay an attack. And what you're shooting for, Greg kind of touched on a little bit, you're doing this to delay until the police arrive, because in virtually all of the active shooter instances that we've looked at, the shooting of innocent people will end once the suspect engages with law enforcement. Their attention is now drawn to law enforcement, and that's what they have to deal with. That's immediate. They can no longer focus on harming or killing people. So that's what we're going to, really the crust of what I'm going to explain to you. One of the first concepts that I'll talk about is time. Greg talked about it a little bit too. He touched on it, but typically in an active shooter situation, you look at, the first thing you're going to look at, that it takes about 2 to 3 minutes from the time something happens until the first person at that scene actually calls 911. I know that seems like a long time, but when you're under this and the training that we give to the civilian staff when at Gibraltar, we see the same thing. When we start setting up a scenario, it takes several of the scenarios, no one calls 911, even though we tell them in the beginning, make sure you call 911. That's what starts it. The quicker you can do that, the quicker this event will end. But in most of these situations, what they found out when they went back and analyzed them was that it takes 2 to 3 minutes before the first person, from the first shot or the first encounter with that person, until the first person that's seen actually calls 911. From there, you have about a 1 to 2 minute time frame where the dispatcher will be able to receive that call, interpret the information, and then dispatch the police to that scene. So now we're looking at somewhere around 5 minutes before the first police officer gets the information from dispatch to actually go to the scene. So now we have to tack onto that time, whatever the response time is, wherever the closest unit is to that scene. Maybe it's 1 to 2 minutes, maybe it's 4 or 5, but you can quickly see that this time is adding up. And like Greg talked about it, some of the shootings, specifically Virginia Tech, they had 32 people killed in like 11 minutes. Sandy Hook had 26, and it was in 5-minute time frame. So if we look at this, we look at what we can expect law enforcement to be on scene, engage the suspect, and for essentially the killing to stop, we have to understand that we're going to have to do something in that meantime. That if we're going to have a security plan, it can't just solely rely on, well, we're going to call the police and hope that they get there, because what these incidents are showing us is we have to do something amongst ourselves to protect ourselves in the meantime. And that's what I want to talk about. So that time concept is important to understanding when you develop a safety plan, understanding that time, what the response time really is. And you just can't give up, call 911 and do what we've traditionally done, which is go into a room, shut the door, shut the lights off like we were kids in school and practicing a tornado drill. We can't think like that anymore with active shooters. So we have to change our way of thinking. One of the things that you can do in your security plan, what I'd recommend is looking at your vulnerabilities. So if you have this person designate, start looking, your place of worship, let's look at the doors. If an active shooter occurred, do the doors you have, are they adequate to prevent or delay that person if they're trying to get to you? If you can shut that door, are they adequate to stop somebody? One of the things we do at Jabal, we have the door closers. If you're familiar with it, a lot of commercial buildings, the door closers that'll pull the door shut at the top. What we did was cut sections of about 12 inches long of fire hose, and we gave them to all the dorms, to the church and the schools. And what those can be used for, you can just slide them over the end of those door closers, and the person can't open the door from the other side. So just thinking about things like that, how could I make this door safer if we do have an event to delay that person? Because again, it's all about time. We want to save time so the police can get here and prevent him from getting in and hurting as many people as he possibly can. So that's one thing to look at, when you're trying to develop your safety plan. Are our doors secure? Maybe we leave a door open during services. Maybe that door could be shut. Maybe that's not the best thing. Another thing you could look at, the layout inside your place of worship. Does it create blind spots where you may not see a threat coming or danger coming? For example, if you have people coming in, there may be adequate warning if you see someone you don't recognize or whose behavior is just not right. But maybe because of the way you have your place of worship configured, you just don't have that clear line of sight. Could you reconfigure it so that you could see things a little quicker and give you a little more time to respond to those? So those are things you think about when you look at vulnerabilities. The last concept I'll kind of touch upon is you're going to have to, just like we do, conduct drills routinely. And what we do at Jabal when we teach is we take the people into the places where they actually work. So if you work in the cafeteria, we will bring you there to do these drills because we want you thinking about, if you're in here and something happens, how could you barricade the door? We want you to think about a real environment, just not some place that you're not normally working at. Where are you going to be most of the time? Let's deal with that and see what the issues are here. Where are you vulnerable here? Where are you more protected here? Another thing is figure out how you're going to warn other people to danger. That's one of the biggest things when we do these drills. We teach, let other people know. We may be 25 people spread out in 2,000 square foot office space, but if we can't alert each other to the problem, then we can't let anybody else prepare and try to protect themselves. So that was another thing too. How are you going to alert people? And don't create codes. That's one of the biggest mistakes you have. Hospitals, places like that, they'll create a code that maybe a few people that work there understand that. So if the code for active shooter, for example, is 911 or 999, and that goes over some intercom system, that's great for the people that might work there. But what about the people that are visiting? They don't know what that is. And if you've sent that alert out, you're not telling them that there's a problem. So really, honestly, the bad guy knows he's there. If you have an active shooter, say active shooter. Say where he's at exactly so you can alert everybody else to the problem and so they can take precautions to help themselves and others. I emphasized already calling 911, that's a big thing. The biggest change with this, and it should be happening in these drills, is don't just go back to the old fire drills like we did in school. Start thinking of the number one best thing, the best solution is you run away and you get away. Lockdowns are okay if you cannot get away. If you can get away from the building. That's number one. That's how things have changed over the last 20 years, how we looked at this. Get away. If you have to barricade, that's fine, but use that barricade only because you couldn't get away or that it provides you more time to maybe get in a room, barricade it, and get out a window so that you can get away. So our number one goal now is change. It's get away, not just lock down and shut off lights, try to hide. Get away from the building, away from the shooter as quickly as you can. Some of those things we also practice are countermeasures. You may have a gun, but if there's 4 or 5 of us in a room and we just couldn't get out and he's coming through our barricade, you pick up whatever you can to defend yourselves and others. And even though he has a gun, we practice these drills, you can't focus on everybody at the same time. So if everybody's throwing something at you and they can overtake you or at least slow you down, again, it goes back to time, then the better chance you have of surviving. So I know I don't have a whole lot of time, and I typically, I'll teach this usually we spend 2 hours with each group when we teach it. But these are probably the biggest concepts. If I'm going to throw something out here in just a few minutes to get you guys thinking about your security plans, those are the areas that I would focus on. Just remember, it's all about time. And no longer do we sit and try to hide. Let's get away from the actual danger. So with that, that's my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief Keen. That was very, very helpful. I appreciate it so much. Sheriff Plasse, the sheriff of the Vigo County, Indiana, former chief of police for Terre Haute, and his topic will be emergency response to an event. Some of those things I've already touched on, but I'm sure there are other things to talk about. So thank you so much, Sheriff.
Thank you, Arthur. Good afternoon. I think I'll just reiterate what Chief Keen said. The sooner we get notified of a problem, the sooner we will be there. And I know a lot of churches have practiced this. Like Chief said again, we can't just sit there and hide. We have to do different things. We have to get out. But if you don't practice that with your congregation or your employers, whatever, the worst time for them to know how to respond to an emergency is when the actual emergency is going on. If they don't train or practice and have an idea in their head on what they're supposed to do, a lot of times they'll freeze up, you get under stress. And we found through police work under stress, we revert back to our training. So I can't emphasize enough how much training you need to do if you're going to have a security plan at your church or your place of business. One aspect of that is once we get that call, you'll see this uniform, you'll see Shawn's uniform, you'll see Greg's uniform, you'll see off-duty officers responding to that. And I would just say, be mindful of that, because if one of our officers runs in with a gun to help find the active shooter, please don't have, if your church security team's armed, try to engage our officer. Now we tell them to you have a badge or a jacket that they can identify, but a lot of times they may forget just with the rush of trying to get there and to help. So just be mindful of that. The more information you can give to us, the better. Description of the shooter, who to look for once we get there. As cold as this may sound, our sole purpose once we arrive is not to treat the injured, it's to stop the killing, stop more people from being shot. So we're going to bypass anybody that's injured at that time. So, as Greg said, if you can teach your congregation the basic life-saving measures, your congregation can do that while we're actively searching for that shooter. And that's our sole purpose, is to stop more killing. And our first guy is going to go in there and do that instead of, as we've seen in the past at Columbine, where we kind of waited. Now, there was a shooting recently in Colorado where it was in the mall, and where the officer did what he was trained to do. He engaged first officer in. He unfortunately lost his life trying to protect other people. So that's what we do. We have guns. We're trained to use them, and that's what we do now. So just be mindful. You may see, officers in shorts, flip-flops, whatever. They don't care when they need to help somebody, they're going to answer that call. And with officers having take-home cars, that's what we're going to do. So just be mindful of that. Get as much information as you can, so when we respond, we know, where to go. And I would just kind of emphasize again what Shawn said. There's going to be times where you have no option but to fight. And again, there's strength in numbers. And I know in a house of worship, it's hard to talk about committing violence against someone. But when he's trying to harm other people, you need to do that to protect others that can't protect themselves. There's going to be children, there's going to be elderly. So the able-bodied people need to step up and do what they can. And there's all kinds of weapons that you're not thinking of in a church. You've got keys. Some people have a key set that could knock out Mike Tyson. I mean, some people have a lot of keys on their key ring. So just things like that, a cell phone, a Bible, a pencil, all these can be weapons, and there's strength in numbers. If someone can distract him, you're going to do something instead of just sitting there waiting for the inevitable to happen. But we're going to respond, full force as soon as we get that call. It's key just once we arrive to point us in the direction of that active shooter, so we can end that situation as soon as we can. Unless there's any questions, I think Greg and Shawn did great in what they did. And we kind of overlapped a little bit, but I think that's good for us to all hear.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Thank you, Sheriff Plasse. That was, again, very, very helpful. And I agree that those overlaps is tremendously helpful, actually, in solidifying some thoughts of what we need to do. Our next speaker is Dr. Dorene Hojnicki, who's the director of Vigo's EMA topic, Emergencies, Disaster Relief, and Emergency Management Systems. Dr. Hojnicki?
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I'm unmuted.
You are. You're
Okay,
good.
thanks. So we're going to take just a little bit different spin, and thank you for Greg and Chief King and Sheriff Plasse for your topics, and that they are crucial. And some of the roles that we have played here in emergency management, we've worked probably most closely right now with the Catholic Deanery and helping them come together, making some planning, doing walkthroughs with them, and also encouraging them to, once they start working on their plans, to work with their local law enforcement or their agency that has jurisdiction, but it should be law enforcement and fire. And we are more than happy to come on through, help point out some things. Chief Keen and Assistant Chief Eldred have been active with St. Pat's safety team that has just recently been formed and working on a plan and going through that. There are grants that are available. I think Scott might address the not-for-profit security grant, which is now more readily available. Let's just put it that way. It wasn't advertised as much, but that is a grant that comes out federally every year, and they are focused just on safety and security. And there are about 4 areas where you can apply for granting. In the past, it's been $100,000, and I think now it's $120,000. But there are some specifics that have to go with that. Not all of our disasters are active shooters. We do live in the Wabash Valley, and so some of our other disasters are usually severe weather. We've had F0 and F1 tornadoes that came through the Terre Haute area. We have severe storms, winter storms. I think a lot of our response partners can remember Arctic blast in 2013, 2014, where you were out there answering calls when it was -15 wind chill factor, 12 inches of snow, and blizzard horizontal conditions. So our first responders obviously are out there in all weather and all conditions. So what we ask our parishes or our churches to think about is an all hazards approach. So we just, although it's extremely important to plan for that armed intruder, that active shooter, we need to plan for all of our other all hazards. So the most common thing we're going to see is really our severe weather. And when saying that is we ask our churches and our houses of worship, do you have a weather alert on your cell phones or your smartphones? Do you keep a weather radio, and do you have a program charge and have a backup battery? Do you have a plan when there's a tornado warning coming through of where you can move your congregation? And does fire rescue know where that hiding point is for severe weather? So if they have to do a rescue or there is structural damage, where should they start looking first for people that may be sheltering? The other thing is when people hear disaster declarations, they think that automatically the federal checkbook is open and money is coming. The answer to that is no. There are a couple steps that have to happen, even with a federal declaration. First of all, the president has to declare a federal declaration. On the local level, we need a local declaration of an emergency that usually happens on the county level. There will also be a state declaration of emergency. Currently, we've been for the past year. We've been under a state of emergency declared by the governor for the pandemic and COVID. And then usually there's a presidential declaration. So right now we are continuously under the federal declaration that started back in March of 20 and the state declaration that started at the same time. So those emergency powers and those fundings are coming directly from those disaster declarations that started back in 2020. So typically the locals will enact a disaster. Typically in Indiana, it'll be county commissioners. And then a state will come on board. There are frequently, we have local disaster declarations and there is no presidential declaration. If there is no presidential declaration, then the FEMA wallet is not open. For monies to move forward, so we have a state, we have a county, we have a state, and now we have a federal declaration. The first thing that we have to do is within the first 48 to 72 hours, we have to go out and start looking at our areas of damages. We look at twofold. The first one is public assistance, and public assistance is typically our infrastructure that is owned by a governmental entity. So roads, culverts, buildings, those type things. And we have to kind of ballpark, what is it going to take to repair those things that are damaged? There is also a second part to disaster declarations, which is the IA part, or the individual assistance. That doesn't always automatically kick in. It'll depend on the federal or the presidential declaration, whether it'll be only public assistance or it will be individual assistance. You don't get individual assistance without a public assistance. Many times we've seen over the years where we know hurricanes are coming in, they're 7 days out, they're 3 days out, and we'll get a presidential declaration, which allows federally and state for them to bring assets up to start asking for funding. So sometimes those are declared ahead of time. But again, we don't get individual assistance until we get a public assistance declaration. Then they will also say in that declaration, what is pretty much the copay. Standard federal declarations are 75-25. So of the eligible costs, the local entity has to pay 25% and federally they will pay 75%. That takes a long time to percolate through. It can take up to 6 to 9 months to work through a federal declaration and actually getting some monies rolling back locally. Back in 2008, when we had the floods, that was a little bit of a changeup, and federally they gave the state of Indiana a 90-10 split. So federally, 90% of the eligible costs were covered by the federal government and 10 by local government. So those are some of the things that you have to be aware of. People wondering where is money coming through to the local entities and when is it coming? Well, it comes very, very slowly, and it's pretty hard to get a lot of the costs covered. Just so you know, they base a threshold. So what does the local county have to pay, or what are they responsible for? I can tell you for Vigo County, the census they will use is the 2019 census, and they show Vigo County as 107 and 38 people for the 2019 census. So the county must reach their threshold even before any public assistance would come in. So for the county, so every county would have to pay per person $3.89. So our threshold for Vigo County is $416,377.82. So if we do not meet that threshold of damages, then we would not be eligible for any of the federal funding. For the state of Indiana, their per capita is $1.55. The 2019 census was 6.732 million people. And so the threshold for the state of Indiana would be $10,434,600. Once again, if they did not meet that damage threshold, they are not eligible for federal funding. So a lot of people just aren't aware of that. If there is also a federal declaration that say Vigo County does not make its threshold, we still have to report our damages to the state, because the state will use anything that what we would be putting towards our threshold could help the state make the state threshold, even though we would not getting anything locally. So it's just trying to help people understand how the disaster declarations go. And they are usually very definite on what the eligibility are. There are 7 different categories of eligibility. When a federal declaration is authorized, they will tell you which of the 7 categories are authorized, and that at what percent the locals really basically have to kick in. I did email Scott, and I think he may have it up on his resource page. We did send a template that we have used within the local Catholic deanery for some emergency response plans, with some ideas what to look for. What should you include in your plan? And it leaves you areas that you can kind of plug and play. So areas to look at and put in your response numbers. Who does, if you have glass breakage, who does that? Who's your insurance carrier, and what's their 24-hour number, and who will actually answer the phone? So people that are important for you, that know the most about your house of worship, basically who knows the keys, who turns on the lights, where's the water shut off, where's the gas shut off, where's your electric that's coming in. We've also sent up a copy of the walkthrough that we do. It's approximately 11-page form, and we go through. We will go through with the elders or the decision makers of that house of worship to kind of see where things are at and give them food for thought. And the other thing I just sent to Scott this afternoon, we made a flyer that St. Patrick is going to put in its pews or laminate, and it gives very quick ideas of what to do in times of emergency. We have on there severe weather, particularly tornado warnings, earthquake. We do sit on the Wabash Valley seismic zone, which is a part of the new Madrid, and the last time we had some activity on that was 2008. The other thing that's on that flyer is what to do in fire, armed intruder, medical emergencies, and then we have a small map. That map there on that flyer is for St. Patrick's, showing where our AED is, where the handicap entrances are, and where exits are. So people that may not be familiar with that parish, in that pew could pull up that card and quickly get an idea what to do. On that card for armed intruder, the first thing we have under armed intruder is dial 911 if you are able, remaining calm, leave your personal belongings, get up and get out as quickly as possible, continue until you are out of the way and out of the line of sight of church. Once again, we put in dial 911 if you are available. As Chief and Greg have reiterated, the time to the first phone call is amazingly long because people really aren't thinking. Then we say, if you're unable to flee, seek shelter out of sight and hopefully under coverage. Only confront if you absolutely have to. Use any means of distraction, incapacitation when possible. When police arrive, follow directions, keep your hands where they can easily be seen by the officers, and then follow all instructions by law enforcement and wait to hear the all clear. So that is just a quick, concise, that's in that brochure that could be used generically. The format that we sent it up is in Publisher. So if you use Publisher, you can go in, put your identifying information in, or anything that might be particular for your house of worship. So you have to go walk through your house of worship thinking, what does a bad guy see? When a storm comes through, where should we go? Think about overhanging lights, statuary, stained glass windows, windows that can be blown in. And so places of protection or where you go within your church. Again, trying to keep away from glass. You want to be in interior rooms, particularly for our severe weather. Make sure you have a weather radio. Make sure it's programmed. And there's lots of great apps for smartphones that you can silent and vibrate while you're in a service, but would let you know. And then also have a plan that during your service, whoever is providing safety or ushers or greeters know what your plan is. For some of our parishes in our deanery, we have a red, yellow, green card system. The ushers for St. Pat, St. Margaret Mary, if it is a something that the priest might see or the minister might see that the congregation would not see, in their missalette they have a yellow laminated card, and they could just lay it for us on the altar, so it is seen by the people that are greeting or ushering, to let them know that something may be going on, but it may not be clear. And then they can interact, whoever is officiating the service, to see what the problem might be. They also have a red card that would initiate, at that time, trying to find out immediately what the officiant is seeing, and may start an evacuation. And then they also have a green card that once it's all clear, they can lay a green card out there. But using a red, yellow, green very quickly, so those that are serving, greeting, ushering, those type things can interact, and you need to set your plans up ahead of time for those people to know what it is, so they kind of have a heads up situation. And the other thing is, when people are calling 911, stay calm. Who are you? Where are you? Call back number, and trying to be very concise. What is going on? Listen to the instructions of the dispatcher, whether they tell you to hang up or stay on the line. So we're available to come out, and we'll be happy to do a walkthrough and assist you with some of your plans. That's about all I got for right now. I won't take any more of your time.
Thank you, Dr. Hojnicki. That was very helpful. And you're sending that information to Scott, or you've sent a lot of that information to Scott so you can put it on the website?
I've sent those 3 documents to Scott for
Great.
your research page.
Awesome, fantastic. Okay, so you guys can all search for that on the website. Thank you. Travis Chesshir is the coordinator of safety security for the Vigo County School Corporation, is a former detective and a hostage negotiator for the Terre Haute Police Department, and he's going to be talking about training and communication prior to an event. Travis?
Thank you, Arthur.
Sure.
First, following 4 exceptional speakers makes it easy on me. They covered a lot of my material.
Okay.
I'll move into, try not to get too far out of line, but planning for all potential emergencies will help both you and your staff or workforce, since it's more of a church setting than a workplace. It helps you guys be prepared for unexpected situations. One of the biggest things you guys are going to deal with is the size of your facility and the size of your workforce. Those things are going to dictate the type of training requirements that you guys are going to face. One of the biggest things you can do, which Doc touched on several times, as did Sheriff Plasse, is your emergency action plans. Every one of your sites should have one of those. In those should have floor plans, your fire extinguishers, potential, anything that might be a threat to your staff, whether it be a man-made emergency, weather-related, fire, whatever the case may be. And I know today's climate, we all focus on active shooter and man-made situations, but like Doc said, most of the stuff we're going to deal with here in your setting is going to not be man-made issues. During your training, your emergency action plans should also have the types of emergencies you're going to face, your reporting procedures, any type of alarm system that you may have in your facility, and your shutdown procedures. Make sure when you do your EAPs that you include your special hazards specific to your facilities, including toxic chemicals, flammable materials, radioactive sources, and water reactive substances. Once you get that emergency action plan done, Being proactive is going to be the thing that's going to keep you guys the safest, and going along with that is your training. Concerning your emergency preparedness and general training for employees, you should have individual roles and responsibilities, threats, hazards, protective actions, notifications, warnings, and communication procedures. Should also have means for locating family members in the event of emergency. I don't know if you guys do this with your congregation, but maybe have an emergency contact card for each one of your folks there, that so in the event something does happen, you can reach out on their behalf. Location and use of common emergency equipment and the emergency shutdown procedures. Employees have to know when and how to sound alarms in the event of an emergency. And also, like Chief King touched on, you have to notify law enforcement. We can't get there if you guys don't call us. And if you guys don't practice that, practical exercise is everything. If you're in a time of high stress, you're going to resort to your training. And if part of your training isn't the notification to law enforcement, then you're not going to do it in a real life situation. Your employees, one of the main things, are going to have to know who's in charge. We can't have 5 chiefs on scene doing one thing, and they're going to need to know their specific role and who to look for in the event that they need direction. So identifying who your leaders are is going to be beneficial for you guys. The team must be specifically trained for potential emergencies and know how to effectively carry out specific duties. Those duties include, but are not limited to, use of various types of extinguishers, first aid, including CPR, requirements of OSHA for bloodborne pathogens, shutdown procedures, chemical spill control, search and emergency rescue procedures, and hazardous material response. Employees should be expected to administer medical aid, and they must be given adequate training and supplies in order to conduct that. When you enact your emergency action plan and you expect your staff to respond and assist, especially with any sort of trauma, we have to make sure that we're protecting our staff as well, and doing so by teaching them how to protect themselves against the bloodborne pathogens, respiratory issues, including escape-only respirators, and methods for an additional thing is methods for preventing unauthorized access to your site. So even though that there may already be some sort of issue there, we don't want to compound that by opening the floodgates for anybody off the street to come in there. Once you've done these, they need to be trained routinely. Review your EAP with your staff when the initial plan is developed, and when each plan is developed, the employee needs to be taught that when they're initially assigned to the job. You need to train the employee on the EAP, develop your initial plan. When you're hiring new employees, if you introduce new equipment, materials, or processes into the workplace that affect evacuation routes, that needs to be documented. Change the layout or design of your facility. Anytime you make additions or anything, you need to make sure that that's documented in your exit routes, and everything are updated in your emergency action plan. Constantly revise and update your emergency procedures. One of the biggest things that I've learned over the last 12 years is have somebody be a scribe. When you conduct your training and your drills, have somebody simply review it and take notes. Don't partake in any of the training, just observe it. And then when it's done, you guys can debrief, they can tell you what you did great, what you did wrong. Everybody's got a good plan until it actually happens. And that's when you're going to see the holes in your training and your preparedness. Communicating with people in close proximity to your structure so that you have a potential offsite area to evacuate to, especially in the event of an active shooter. Trying to find some sort of safe haven near there that's within walking distance for your people. Something that we always got to be aware of. And then also drills and reviews. It's your responsibility to make sure that all your employees know the EAP and are familiar with the evacuation routes and shutdown procedures, which I know we've already covered a little bit. and just discuss the strengths and weaknesses in your drills and create a plan for improvements. By planning, training, and using teamwork, you and your employees will be ready when disaster strikes if you continue to do those types of things. I had a lot more prepared for you guys, but the prior four stole my thunder. So if you guys have everything that I've prepared, I will make sure to send to Scott. So if you guys have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact me at any time.
Great. Thank you so much, Travis. And our final speaker is going to be Scott Skillman. I do want to remind you that we're recording this, and this recording will be made available to you all. So if you missed anything, or you want to just review at any point, you can get your hands on a recording. So Scott, thank you so much for your leadership and initiative on putting this together, and we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone coming. We are very blessed to have so many professionals who are prepared, knowledgeable, and willing to take their time to share with us. There's so much information that's been imparted to us today. And speaking only for myself, I know that I can't keep track of all of it. I need a way to manage the information about managing an event. I need a method that will assure that I am continually updating my knowledge so that changes that may occur may require a different sort of response. I'm kind of a big fan of Bob Knight, not necessarily as a person, but as a coach. And Bob Knight used to always ask, are you prepared to win? And he was not talking about a desire to win. He was talking about being prepared, doing all the things that needed to be done to be ready to compete and succeed. Well, it's not a game, all right, but preparation is the key. And I do believe that being prepared means that you have thought through all of the issues that might put your congregants at risk. And that's, you can think about shooters and intruders. Those are dynamic topics and scary. They scare you to action. But it's actually probably the more mundane that really needs preparation for us here in our area. So that's why it's so key to have a plan to train members, whether it's your leadership or whether it's actual regular attendees, to be prepared to administer first aid, to have a first aid kit and where everybody knows where it is, to have exits that are well marked, to have emergency lighting in the case of an outage. All of these things are routine and plannable. So what we're talking about is having dedication to a plan, and then the fortitude to train the plan, because the best plan in the world is worthless if only one person knows it. So what we're talking about is a system that each congregation can go through. Certainly we can benefit from sharing it, but each congregation will have to have its own system in which they make decisions about who and how are we going to prepare. And this is where a network can be beneficial. We know, we've heard from many of our professionals that first aid training is really an essential idea. So should we all arrange to individually train for first aid, or can we work together and have one central event where we can have a team of trainers teach an entire congregation, an entire community at one time? This is the opportunity of networking. But I want to talk first a little bit more about the benefits of having a plan. The first and most obvious is that many of your congregations will qualify for deductions on your insurance premium by having a written plan. This is something that you can reach out to and find out exactly what deductions are available and what plan, proof of plan you might need to do that. More significantly, I'm going to talk about the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. This is a program that was set up 2 years ago by the Department of Homeland Security. The grant for the first year was $90 million available nationwide to limited areas. This year, they have doubled that amount of money, and it's $180 million available, and half of that amount is available in other non-urban areas. All right, so for the first 2 years, the only areas were urban identified areas, and hint, hint, none of them were in Indiana. All right, so this is the first year that Indiana is eligible to apply for and obtain grants. These grants are administered, the application is administered by the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. The application can be had there. You can go to their website and you will get their information. What you will find when you go there and get their information is that the grant process for this year started on March 8th and ends at 5 p.m. on April 23rd. Your application must be fully submitted by that time. The application process is available online, and it is a series of statements that must be provided by the applicant. And once submitted, they will be graded by the Homeland Security Department, and they will be prioritized. Once these are prioritized, you will see that people who have prepared their grants are going to be in a much better position to obtain the grants. The process is lengthy. You have to have mission statements. Many congregations have mission statements, some do not. You have to have a threat assessment prepared. Many people have some of these things done, many do not. They will need to be professionally prepared. Now, what that means is not that you've got to go pay somebody to do it. What it means is you need a professional to assist in doing it. There are a number of resources that are available to congregations to do a self-assessment. These are very helpful for planning, very helpful for the initial stages of an application for a grant, but they are not a replacement for professionally tailored threat assessment. There are walkthrough guides that are resources available to help each congregation identify potential risks to their congregants. These checklists are tremendous first steps. And the keys to these plans are that it's got to be more than one person doing it. You know, just having one person make an assessment will be skewed and will not be accurate, and it won't be effective for what you intend to use it for at a later date. So really, initially, the first step is putting together a team that is going to be assessing this situation and going to be responsible for seeing it all the way through. Seeing it all the way through means do the assessment, write up the assessment, prepare a plan, and then train the plan. And then after you're done, you've got to prepare for an evaluation of the plan. How do we figure out the plan that we put together and trained is effective? Well, these are all things that our professionals who attended today have the answers for. And rather than have them present those answers 30 or 40 times for each congregation, we are in a position where we have a close enough community, well-communicating community, where we can set up events that we can all benefit from at the same time. So I want to wrap up the part about the grant program. The window closes April 23rd, 5 p.m. The process would, if successful, will result in a reimbursement grant. That means that once you're approved, you will have to have the money spent and then get reimbursed. If you're buying particular items to provide security. Some of these items have to be pre-screened before they're eligible for reimbursement. So what I'm telling you is it's possible you could get up to $150,000 in grants in Indiana per your application, but the odds are not likely. The true benefit of this grant application is the ability for it to help you assess your needs, assess your vulnerabilities, and put together a very focused plan on how you're actually going to accomplish that. It's one thing to say, we want to have a safe building. It's another thing to say, here's exactly how we're going to do it. And you need to plan for some times outside of your primary event. So maybe you have services once a week, maybe you have Sunday school, maybe you have prayer meetings during the week. Do you have staff that's on premises during normal work hours? These are things that need to be assessed. You need to develop a plan to keep them safe and your employees and people who are in the building. And you also need to have a way to have them able to communicate when there are incidents. The major step of this process is the investment justification portion of your application. This is the portion of an application in which you declare why you need the grant. All right, you need to demonstrate that you have exactly the threat that is present in your area and to your congregation. Well, how do you do that? I mean, if unless you have been a target, how can you know whether you're a threat? Well, we have the answer to that. And the answer to that is by looking at successful applications in the past. What we can see is, how do you tailor the activity around you to demonstrate the need for your present situation? So where do we get information about the activity around us? It's not exactly floating out there. Well, there are networks that share this information. And that's what I would like for us, all of us, to be involved in doing. Let's share this information in a way that we can communicate it safely with one another, but not necessarily alert malcontents or miscreants, for lack of a better description, who might see something on the news about the temple having graffiti, and they realize, we got a temple? Well, I better go bomb that thing. That's really one of the fears that people have is, is this a thing? I mean, does it really need to be, do I need to call the police? Do I need to alert the media? I'm not going to answer that question for you. But what I can say is that all of our congregations can benefit from the knowledge of what's going on in our community. So by creating a network that shares this information, we can then share this information in a way that can be placed into an application for a grant. So it's a win-win situation. All right, so I'm going to wrap up, if I can, about that portion of my presentation. I want to talk about what I have set up. I have set up a website that is called thsafetysecurity.org. TH for Terre Haute, safety security, all one word, and .org. You can find it on the internet. It's a work in progress, to be honest with you. The resources that are going to be placed in there, as Dr. Hojnicki mentioned, they're in the process of being loaded in. I have plans for many, many more resources to be present there to help with self-assessment. It's been noted in the chat that Dr. Hojnicki says you don't have to have a professionally done assessment, and that is true. It does not need to be professionally done, but I think it does need the input of a professional. So we'll have to agree to disagree on that. And maybe it's a question of semantics. But what is unquestionable is that we can benefit from each other's presence, knowledge, ears, and I's. There are lots of input that can be heard and had. There are lots of decisions that are very individual and that can only be had by your congregation. Security is a concept that is different from safety. That is a significant factor that should be considered in the process of planning. Decisions about how to best provide security are should be private, should be individual, and should not necessarily be public. With the network that I'm preparing, I don't intend to share anybody's plan. My goal is to provide a method for developing a plan that you can use and train and assess its particular viability for your congregation. So I'm hopeful that we're going to record this event and we're going to blast it out to many of the churches and congregations again. And if you go to the website, you will see that there is a page that you can join. And by joining, all you're doing is adding your name to a mailing list. With that mailing list, we will send out polls to find out, what do you want to do next? What is your biggest concern? How can we best help you in this process? We will not be publicizing events that get reported to us. If it's graffiti, if it's a threat, and there are active threats going on in our community right now, I can tell you this. What we will probably do, we haven't worked out the details, but there will probably be a quarterly report that is distributed amongst the network about events in the prior year. Working with Terrorism Task Force, with Greg Ferency and other statewide Terrorism Task Force directors, we have access to resources that can provide that. So we look forward to doing that. Okay, I've gone on too long. I want to thank a few people. President Edwards, I really appreciate your presence and co-sponsoring our event. Sister Damiano from the Sisters of Providence, thank you very much for your support. Louise Mengetti, I'm going to get her name wrong, I'm sorry, but thank you very much for the support and cooperation from the deanery. To all of our professionals, thank you, thank you, thank you. Your contributions, your concern are so appreciated. I can't begin to express it. And lastly, to Arthur Feinstad for acting as our MC, for initiating with the Interfaith Council, helping me to put this all together. It could not have been done without you. So special thank you to you, Arthur.
Thank you.
So I'm going to kick it off back to you, Arthur. You can say goodbye. And
Sure. Yeah, well, we've gone over, so I know you guys are eager to get on to your next events. But just to thank the co-sponsors, Interfaith Council, the Sisters of Providence, the Deanery, the United Hebrew Congregation, Rock Church of the Wabash Valley, and of course the Terre Haute branch of the NAACP. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for spending the Friday afternoon with us, and thank you for the professionals who gave us your expertise. And it's hugely, it can save lives. Hope we don't have to face that, but if we do, I think you've given us information that can really help save us and keep us safe as we worship. Thank you all very much and have a great weekend. Bye-bye now.